In the previous section, we talked about module systems in JavaScript. In this one, we will work with child processes and workers. The child process module is part of the Node.js runtime and allows us to spawn worker processes that can assist our main thread. Let's begin the section by introducing the exec function of the child process module to spawn a child process and assign work to it. Let's begin working on a fresh project, an empty project. We can begin by creating an app.js file and separate the job to a separate worker. Now, what should the job be? In this example, we are going to use the countries API, the REST countries API. It's something very similar to what we're used to with JSON placeholder, only this time we get back a list of all the countries in the world. And we are going to filter them and print them to a CSV document. Sounds like just the right amount of work for a worker process and not for the main thread. I'm going to do a console.log statement in app.js, just notifying the user that we are spawning a separate worker to run the task. And in order to spawn that worker, we are going to import the exec function from the child process library. Now, in the exec function, we should specify the exact command that we want to run. This is exactly like you would specify the command if you were to run it on a terminal window. So we use node to spawn the worker.js file. And within this callback, we know that the worker has finished by the time that this callback is called. So this is the parent process. This is all we need to do. Now let's put some work for our worker. I will begin by installing Axios so we can have a library that performs XML HTTP requests to the REST countries API. Import Axios. We're gonna need the operating system library because we are going to be building a CSV document, and when writing a CSV document, it's important to know the type of line ending character used by your operating system. The OS library is going to help us with that. And let's set the country's URL, which is the URL to the get endpoint of the REST countries API that will return a list of existing countries. So this is the whole domain. I'm going to use the second version of the API. This is a get endpoint, and it doesn't require any type of authentication. I guess it has some kind of rate limit, so you can't ping it countless times, but you don't have to export an API key or an authorization header in order to make requests to it. I'm going to use Axios, the default driver, and perform a get request, parse the data, and in this function, in the exclude unwanted fields function, we are going to loop over the countries and only keep the fields in the response object that we really want to use. So for the purpose of this exercise, let's assume that we want to save into a CSV file the name of the country, the region, which is something like Europe or North America, and the subregion, which is something like more specific region of the country. And let's create a function that will take those countries that have excluded the unwanted fields and generate a CSV. Now, if we didn't provide a list of countries, or we don't have any countries for some reason, perhaps because the XML HTTP request failed, then we just return an empty string. Otherwise, and this is interesting because this is going to be very concise and smart code, we are going to iterate over the keys of the first country and join them with a comma. This will produce the first line of the CSV that contains the names of the fields. We use this object.keys method instead of just saying name, comma, region, comma, or subregion, because if we change the wanted fields, if we perhaps add or remove a field, then we don't have to rewrite this generate CSV function. And for the rest of them, we separate them by an empty line and map the country's object. And at this point, we need to return a single string instead of returning an object. So we need to concatenate the values. Object.values it is, and we're going to join them with a comma. This will produce an array of all the lines that we want to write to our CSV document, which of course is not a string, so we need to join those lines with an end-of-line character imported from the OS library. That would either be the carriage return and line feed on Windows, or a single line feed on Unix-based operating systems. Then for the main logic, I'm going to create an asynchronous immediately invoked function expression, and within it, I'm going to retrieve the countries by awaiting the fetch countries method, and then filter them with exclude unwanted fields to only get the 3 fields that we want to print to our CSV document. And now it's time to get the string that contains the text that we need to write. And at this point, we're going to use promisify and the file system library that we imported at the top of the file to write the countries to a document. So we need to promisify the write file method because it uses callbacks by default, and we want to call it with the name of the file, the encoding. Make sure to always use proper encoding, followed by the text that we want to write. Now that everything is prepared, and since we're using CommonJS, we are ready to go. We don't need to compile our code like we did in the previous section. We can go ahead and do a node app. So we spawned the worker finished, and you can see that the produced file by the worker is a list of all the countries along with the region and sub-region.